The House will come to order. Prayer by the chaplain.
Heavenly Father, I pray today for our legislature. You ordained government that we might live a peaceable life. I thank you for our lawmakers and pray today that wisdom rests in their hearts. You said in your word that if any of you lack wisdom, let him, let her ask of God. We ask today for wisdom in the affairs of government and believe that we receive it now. In your name we pray. Amen.
From Living Word Christian Center, Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing and recite the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The clerk will take the roll.
We're getting Travis already. You want to turn it off? Check, check, check one, check two.
Testing. The clerk will close the roll. A quorum is present. The clerk will read the journal of the preceding day.
Journal of the House, 89th session, 39th day, St. Paul, Minnesota, Wednesday, April 15th, 2015.
If there is no objection, further reading of the journal will be dispensed with, and the journal will be approved as corrected by the chief clerk. Hearing no objection, the journal is approved as corrected by the chief clerk. Comparison reports. There are copies of this order of business on each member's desk. If there's no objection, the motions will prevail. Hearing no objection, the motions prevail, and the substitutions will be made. Reports of standing committees and divisions. A copy of this order of business has been placed on each member's desk. If there's no objection, the reports will be adopted. Hearing no objection, the reports are adopted. Second reading of Senate files.
Second reading Senate File 1081.
Second reading.
Second reading Senate File 1147.
Second reading.
Second reading Senate File 1741.
Second reading. Introduction of bills. The following House files have been offered for introduction today. The chief clerk will report the House files and give them their first reading.
Introduction of first reading of House Files 2224 through House File 2235.
First reading, House files 2224 through 2235. Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate. This is the O'Driscoll motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following House file, herewith returned as amended by the Senate, in which amendments the concurrence of the House is respectfully requested. House file number 794, an act relating to surveying, signed Joanne M. Zoff, Secretary of the Senate. O'Driscoll moved that House concur in the Senate amendments to House file number 794 and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Senate.
I recognize the author, Representative O'Driscoll, who will explain the Senate amendments. Representative O'Driscoll.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. That is my wishes is to accept Senate language on this and to concur. What had happened was we had passed this bill about a month ago from the House. Everyone in the chamber present that day voted for it. It was the technical corrections for surveyors, county surveyors and private surveyors, clarifying language due to technology and other. We found two words after we passed it that the Senate needed to correct, and there are still no opponents to this. As a matter of fact, it brings what Representative David and Chair David talks, the elusive peace in the valley on this. And so members, I would encourage you to support and to vote yes on the concurrence today.
Any discussion on the Senate amendments? There being no discussion, all those in favor of the motion to concur with the Senate amendments say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended by the Senate.
Third reading, House File number 794, as amended by the Senate.
Third reading as amended by the Senate. Any further discussion? Seeing no discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill.
I will. I haven't signed it yet, but it hasn't passed yet.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 130 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by the Senate and its title agreed to.
Message from the Senate. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following Senate file herewith transmitted. Senate file number 1238, signed Joanne Emshoff, Secretary of the Senate.
First reading of Senate files.
First reading of Senate file number 1238, an act relating to liquor. Sanders moved that Senate file number 1238 and House file number 1090, now on the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Hearing no objections, so ordered. Calendar for the day. The first bill on the calendar for the day is House File 830. The clerk will report the bill.
House file number 830, number 2 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to public safety, permitting sale and purchase of firearms in any state where lawful under Federal Gun Control Act.
I recognize the bill author, the member from Wright, Representative Lucero, to introduce your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And before I forget, I will ask for a roll call vote. Okay. Mr. Speaker, this is clarifying language. And to help give some background on the bill, in 1968, the Federal Gun Control Act was passed, which, Mr. Speaker, it's a little bit loud in here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 1968, the Federal Gun Control Act was passed, which limited the purchase of long guns to a citizen's resident state and any contiguous states, so long as the state laws of both the resident state and the state that the purchase was taking place in was legal. In 1969, the Minnesota State Legislature passed a law which affirmed Minnesota citizens' right to purchase long guns. This is out of the ordinary because typically laws are passed which prohibit behavior, but in this case it was simply affirming behavior. So again, affirming that a Minnesotan can purchase long guns in contiguous states. Then in 1986, the Federal Firearms Owners Protection Act was passed, which rescinded the 1968 Federal Gun Control Act, thereby allowing residents to purchase guns, not just long guns now, not just in contiguous states, but in any state. So the purpose for my bill today is to bring Minnesota law in conformity with federal law. It simply updates language to make it more clear. And Mr. Speaker, this is a bipartisan bill, and I look forward to your support.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House file number 830.
Third reading. Further discussion on House File 830. Seeing no discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 110 ayes and 19 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 372. The clerk will report the bill.
House File Number 372, an act relating to public safety, amending the requirement to provide notice of possession of firearms at the Capitol complex.
The Speaker recognizes the bill author, the member from Carver, Representative Nash, to introduce the bill.
Mr. Speaker, members, House File 372 is an act that changes the requirement for notification in an additional written form to carry here on the Capitol complex. It is a redundant step that has been outdated now. There is a $1.2 million database that's been appropriated that upon successful issuance of your permit to carry, that now constitutes notification. It's a bipartisan bill, and I appreciate it.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Schoen moves to amend House File Number 372 as follows, and the amendment is coded A1.
The member from Washington, Representative Schoen, to introduce your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This bill just says that when a valid permit carrier or anybody with a firearm in the Capitol, when school children are present, that they would be not be able to carry firearms in the Capitol when school children are present, plain and simple. It also prescribes the Department of Administration to provide signage that says, hey, school kids are here, and we would not, that they would be able to be put out at that time. When the school children are not present, then it would go back to normal. Department of Administration can absorb the cost for any signs. In fact, we are not even prescribing them how to make the signage. They could probably print it on the back of our amendments if they wanted to. Quite simple. And if you look around the Capitol, we have all the signs related to recycling and other things like that. That was asked by one of our members to be put in place, and that is part of Department of Administration's responsibilities, and they'll do that. Also says that we need to figure out a way for the Department of Public Safety to provide an area to secure firearms so that people aren't mandated to leave if they're willing to secure their firearms while school children are present. As we know, this building is quite an educational facility, just like our schools. Our schools don't allow firearms in them, and maybe it's probably a good idea to not have firearms in the building when school children are present.
Mr. Speaker.
Representative Albright.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to a point of order.
State your point of order.
Mr. Speaker, the shown A1 amendment, I do not believe under our rules 4.03 is not germane due to the fact that it increases the spending for the underlying bill. And I have advice, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
Mr. Speaker, in the amendment itself, Representative Schoen cites that Capitol security will need to be present and be aware of designating a place. That alone would rise to additional costing for Capitol security, as well as the storage of the firearms themselves. I would understand that those would need to be locked, as well as someone would need to also be present to administer safekeeping and making sure that the people that have stored their firearms pick those up, and to only those people that have stored those as well in every building on the Capitol grounds, as well as the deployment of portable signs themselves. They're not cheap. They will incur a cost. And so with that, Mr. Speaker, I would hope that you would find my point of order well taken.
Further advice, the member from Washington, Representative Schoen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the thought. I'm sorry I didn't address that issue as well, just like the signage. The issue with storage can be absorbed as well. This is not building a highway or a bridge. This is something that can be handled within the budget constraints that we have already. And there is discretionary funds that can be easily taken to handle these issues. So this is not a major expense at all. It's not even, it's barely worthy of a fiscal note. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, further advice, just remember there is a $10,000 threshold, Mr. Speaker, that they clearly can absorb even if you think there are some costs.
Representative Cornish, for what purpose do you rise?
Advice, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
Mr. Speaker, in the Capitol Security hearings a couple of years back, it was testified that there's hundreds of thousands of permits in Minnesota, and any given day there could be 100 to 120 people carrying inside the Capitol. If they all had to turn their guns, it would take 100 secure lock boxes with key made out of steel. The place would have to be designed for those to affix to the wall. This would be a very expensive item in the thousands of dollars. It's not accounted for, so I think that this is not in order. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we've had many times on the floor, Representative Knobloch, Representative Garofalo speak to the fact that the agency can absorb this. There would be no additional employees required by this. They would be able to handle it with Capitol Security. The signs can't cost more than maybe a couple $100, and to put out the signs, it would be the same security employees who would be here. This is something that, if there is a cost, it can be easily absorbed in the budget, and we should find that this point of order is not well taken.
Members, after reviewing the rule and the amendment, and upon the advice of Representatives Albright, Cornish, Schoen, and Thiessen, I find the point of order well taken.
Mr. Speaker, we'd like to appeal the order.
Representative Thiessen moves to appeal the decision of the chair. And I assume you have advice? Members, the question before the body is, shall the decision of the Speaker stand as the judgment of the House? A yes vote supports a ruling of the Speaker. A no vote goes against the ruling of the Speaker. Any discussion on the motion?
Mr. Speaker.
The member from Carver, Representative Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Schoen, I saw that you were up, and I figured I'd get up and speak before you since it's your amendment. Let you speak last. And Representative Schoen and members, I want to caution you about expecting there to be a zero cost. I spent, a number of us, Representative Lilly and I spent the summer working on a bipartisan, bicameral group working on trying to reduce the percentage of uninsured motorists we have in the state. At the end of all of this, we were essentially told we really couldn't do much because the Driver and Vehicle Services Division doesn't have an up-to-date computer system. So we couldn't really do what we wanted, so we thought we'll just do the absolute minimum. We will require people to show proof of insurance and require the state and the auditors, the people that do this work across the state, and the people at Driver and Vehicle Services to do nothing. Because they can't do it with their computer system, we didn't want them to have to make a photocopy of it and buy a bunch of old-fashioned paper files, so they're required to do nothing. Nothing that they're not currently doing. Nothing, because that's what they told us they can do. For nothing, they came back to us with a $200,000 cost to do nothing. So let's not underestimate the power of state agencies to come back to you with an unexpected cost. So, Mr. Speaker and members, I would encourage you to support the ruling of the Speaker. Representative Schoen, I'm sure this is well-intentioned, but I think you're underestimating the power of our state bureaucracy to really screw things up.
The member from Washington, Representative Schoen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And when we were arguing the tip penalty issue, it was the discussion about minimal costs and the agency could absorb it. And so, if you want to go and you can make this as expensive as you want to, we can build a room for $100,000, or we could have a HOMAC safe for $220. These are handguns, they're not long guns. You can't carry long guns into the state capitol to begin with or on the grounds. And so if any of you have noticed here today or this week that we have a whole new recruit group of Capitol security officers that were brought on by the great work. I think Representative Hoppe, you worked on that before and increased the staffing and helped us do that, and that's fantastic. This is just a simple thing. We're just saying that, this is like a school because it's an educational institution, and while kids are here, we should treat it as such. So I would not ask you to not support the ruling of the chair.
Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor or supporting the ruling of the Speaker say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. It is the judgment of the House that the decision of the Speaker shall stand. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File Number 372.
Third reading. Further discussion on the bill. The member from Carver, Representative Nash.
Mr. Speaker and members, I appreciate the bipartisan support of this, recognizing the value of the $1.2 million database that is far superior to a handwritten note or an email sent in to the Department of Public Safety, who themselves admitted that does nothing additional, and that the ability to access the database with speed and accuracy is far superior to an antiquated, outdated, and really unnecessary additional step. So thank you, and I encourage a green vote.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 92 ayes and 38 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for today is House File 722. The clerk will report the bill.
House File Number 722, number 4 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to public safety, clarifying and delimiting the authority of public officials to disarm individuals at any time.
The member from Sherburne, Representative Newberger, to introduce your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is the Emergency Powers Bill. Shortly after Hurricane Katrina did its damage to the fine city of New Orleans, the orders came out from law enforcement, their leadership, to go door to door with military units, helping them out. And they were confiscating firearms from from lawful and legal owners of these firearms. As they were going door to door, people had little recourse in this. They basically had to hand over what they had. Survivors were left with nothing, with no means to protect themselves or their loved ones or their properties from roving gangs of criminals and thugs. It was very well documented on television, as we know. And in a very few short hours, the city of New Orleans went from the rule of law to the rule of chaos. And Katrina was a perfect example of what happens during times of natural and what can happen during times of natural and man-made disasters. We have the loss of cell phone service, we have communication breakdown, we have the complete breakdown of law and order. Police and rescue units will become completely swamped with rescue activities and not being able to really respond to help. And 911 basically is non-existent. So what House File 722 does, members, is it ensures that the governor only during declared states of emergency can't issue any orders to go to your home or your constituents' homes or your loved ones' homes and confiscate your firearms. Now this only applies to firearms that are owned legally and lawfully. This is property like any other kind of property. 32 other states have passed this. One of the first states to pass this law was the state of Louisiana shortly after Katrina. It was within about 2 months after Katrina that it was passed, and there was only one dissenting vote in the state of Louisiana against that. So members, with that, that's my bill, and I would stand for any questions.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Schoen moves to amend House File number 722 as follows, and the amendment is coded A3.
The member from Washington, Representative Schoen, to introduce your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and Representative Newberger. I had a couple concerns with just making sure there was clarification on the language, and I hope you'll find this is a friendly amendment. This just simply says that a peace officer, for their standards of personal liability, meaning their own personal liability, is exactly the same under any sectional law if they're carrying out their duties. So it wouldn't be any lower, any higher, but just making sure that's expressly clear in the language that you put forth.
Discussion on the amendment. The member from Sherburne, Representative Newberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Schoen. I appreciate the amendment. At this time, I'm not going to accept that amendment. I would recommend that members vote against it. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be opening up an entirely new section of civil law. It's going to create more questions than it would answer. I think that if this is an issue that you think really needs to be addressed, then let's bring it back next session and address it. We can go farther on it next session, but as for now, I'm going to recommend that we don't support the amendment.
The member from Washington, Representative Schoen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I'd ask for a roll call.
A roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. And, Representative Schoen.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Newberger, that exactly what you said. We are opening up a whole new area of civil law and liability issues, and that's exactly why I think this protection needs to be there for law enforcement. So thank you. I'd urge a green vote on the amendment. Support your cops.
Any further discussion on the amendment? The member from Blue Earth, Representative Cornish.
Mr. Speaker, members, I would advise to vote against this amendment. Actually, cops, there's no reason why they shouldn't be protected under liability in a state of emergency. They're still working for their employer. They'd be protected in just the same manner they are now. Whether they're indemnified or not would be up to the employer. I see no reason to change the standard here. Nothing changes just because you're in a state of emergency, so they should already be covered. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment.
Yep.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 45 ayes and 85 nays, the motion does not prevail and the amendment is not adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Schoen moves to amend House File number 722 as follows, and the amendment is coded A4.
The member from Washington, Representative Schoen, to introduce your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this amendment just clarifies to make it very clear that if for some reason that in an area of a disaster declaration that it doesn't prevent officers from prohibiting access to the area from folks with firearms. So if they need to secure the area, that this bill makes it expressly clear, because there's a little bit of question about whether that would make it expressly clear in the language. This makes it very expressly clear that if they need to keep people out with firearms, that they can do that, and they don't have to let them in. This is just an officer safety bill, and for clarification and liability-wise as well, too. So please support the amendment. I'd ask for a roll call.
A roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Further discussion on the amendment. The member from Sherburne, Representative Newberger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Schoen, for your amendment. Your amendment, I can't support it at this time, and I would recommend that we not support this amendment. The question comes to bear that if you look at the amendment itself, there's really no geographical area that's defined as a disaster area. That hasn't been defined. And what you're doing is you're prohibiting people from exercising their Second Amendment rights, from being able to go into a section of our country or a state with firearms. And a good example, the best example that I can think of right now, Representative Schoen, is if you lived in New Orleans a couple of days before Katrina hit, you packed up your family and you left, and then the storm hits, and it's a couple of days later you want to go back to your home to protect your property, you would not be able to bring your firearms back in to protect your home. So when we start getting into the weeds about where we can bring our firearms, and we start delineating here during states of emergency, I think we create more problems than we're trying to solve. So members, I would suggest that we vote, I recommend that we vote against this, but thank you for the amendment.
The member from Washington, Representative Schoen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Newberger, I probably should have said this before. This doesn't mandate that departments or areas have to prevent people from carrying firearms into those areas. This just simply says that if they feel it's necessary for whatever the reason may be, whether it's part of the investigation or otherwise, or if it's part of keeping the area safe, if you leave and come back, it's not uncommon for those secure areas to have an escort back to your property to make sure it's safe and to help you along as well too. This just makes sure that the officers are able to carry out their duties without being held liable again for just doing the job that they're asked to do. And so again, this is an officer safety issue, and that should be just made sure it was expressly clear that this doesn't prevent them from doing their jobs.
The member from Blue Earth, Representative Cornish.
Mr. Speaker and members, it would be a scary world if a father goes out from home to work, or the mother or the spouse, and is separated from their family by a disaster. And then the father or mother is coming back and hearing that there's looting going on and all sorts of chaos. It would not be a good confrontation for a cop to stop me from coming into my residence to search for my family and ask me to surrender my weapon for no reason. So I don't think this is a good idea at all.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 45 ayes and 85 nays, the motion does not prevail and the amendment is not adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File Number 722.
Third reading. Further discussion on House File 722. The member from Sherburne, Representative Newberger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, again, I want to thank you all for following this bill on its course through the legislature. Of all of the firearms bills in the history of our state, this has probably been the most well-vetted firearms bill that we've had. This went through 4 years ago, both the Senate and the House, and it was vetoed by the governor at that time, so it was thoroughly vetted 4 years ago. This bill has been through 3 different committees this time. It stood the test of scrutiny. So members, today we have a second chance. Now is the right time to do what's right, to ensure that Minnesotans have the ability to protect themselves and their loved ones and their property during declared states of emergency. Thank you, and I encourage a green vote.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 88 ayes and 42 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for today is House File 1434. The clerk will report the bill.
House File Number 1434, number 3 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to firearms, the first engrossment.
I recognize the bill author, the member from Cass, Representative Anderson, to introduce your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Today I get the privilege of bringing House File 1434 to the floor. Members, this is a bipartisan bill. This bill would bring Minnesota into the American mainstream by joining 39 other states that currently allow possession of sound suppressors for firearms. Little background on this is that these devices were invented back in 1902 by the same gentleman that invented the muffler for a car. There's the link to this whole thing. All these suppressors is just a muffler. Now, despite what you've seen in the movies or heard on the local media, these gun suppressors do not make a gun silent. What they do is reduce the sound from a rifle or from a pistol to instantly ear damaging to just really, really loud. And a typical suppressed rifle is about 8 times louder than a jackhammer. Suppressors are first and foremost safety devices. Like a seatbelt, they don't completely prevent injury. but they do reduce the risk and severity of ear damage. Now, besides the clear health impact, the sound reduction provided by suppressors have two other key benefits. Noise pollution can be reduced. Neighbors, even out in the country, benefit from reduced noise from shooting activities. Students and instructors and range officers can also benefit this because with the reduced sound, they, in their teaching and participating in the shooting activities, they can hear each other. Now, members, those who oppose this common sense legislation will tell you that without the state ban, it would be a free-for-all for criminals buying suppressors. Now, that's just not true, based on all of the federal mandates to even acquire one of these, because they're regulated the same manner as a machine gun. And right now, the federal government has allowed suppressors since 1934. So no, there won't be a rash of James Bond-style shootings. And there haven't been in the 39 other states that currently allow these safety devices, and there won't be any here. Members, suppressors are currently allowed under federal approved law. There is no compelling need for Minnesota to continue to prohibit them. This bill will take care of that.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Dean R. moves to amend House File Number 1434, the first engrossment, as follows, and the amendment is coded A18.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Dean, to introduce your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe there's an amendment to the amendment.
There is an amendment to the amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment to the amendment.
Dean R. moves to amend his amendment to House File Number 1434, the first engrossment, as follows, and the amendment to the amendment is coded A20.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Dean, to introduce your amendment to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to request a roll call.
A roll call has been requested. You're not there yet. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call.
Thank you, folks.
Representative Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And before I go into the details of the amendment, I want to just take a couple minutes to say a few words on why I'm bringing this forward. It's not because I'm against guns, because I'm not. And it's not because I don't believe in the Second Amendment. I do believe in the Second Amendment. Like Justice Scalia writing for the majority in the Heller decision in 2008, where he wrote, I quote, "Like most rights, the Second Amendment right is not unlimited. It is not a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever in any manner whatsoever for whatever purpose." And later, Judge Alito, writing for the majority in 2010 in the McDonald decision, wrote, where he noted, and I quote, "The ability of law to," I'm sorry, this isn't the quote, but "the ability to law to address long-standing regulatory measures," and I quote, "laws imposing conditions and qualifications on the commercial sale of arms." So these are rulings from the Supreme Court, which sort of give you a little background on as I bring this forward. And it brings me to something that I think is really critical for all of us to consider. Minnesota is a very, very diverse state. And I need to think quite often at times on what that means for me in the context of southwestern Minnesota and some of the things that they struggle with when it comes to issues of water and access to water. It makes me think about my colleagues in the Iron Range, who go through difficult times sometimes when the world economy for steel changes drastically. And that makes me think about and ask all of you to consider what happens in my district. I understand that guns and rifles play a certain role in rural Minnesota and in many people's lives. And I'm not intending to impinge upon those individuals and their rights to carry guns to hunt, to target practice, or whatever they do with legal guns. What I'm doing is asking you to consider briefly what happens in my district. In 2012 and 2013, there were over 444 individuals that were impacted by gun shootings in Minneapolis alone. That doesn't include St. Paul. It doesn't include other areas in major urban areas. And in 2011, there was a young boy who was killed, who was 3-year-old at home on the day after Christmas. His name was Terrell Mays. In 2012 of June, a stray bullet killed a young man who was 5 years old named Nizzle Jones. And there are many, many other children that are killed in my district, which is why I'm bringing this bill forward. I know it's not a total solution to all the issues that will happen, but it does require that background checks take place, as they do when you purchase a gun or a semi-automatic rifle from a dealer right now. That requires a background check. And just for the record, out of 1,000 people polled in Minnesota, 83% support background checks. And what the bill would actually do would require a buyer and seller, when they are transferring a gun or a semi-automatic rifle, to go to a federal licensed dealer and document that transfer through the application of a background check. As I mentioned, just as it is now, if you go to a dealer to purchase a gun, you go through a background check. So that licensed dealer would either verify that background checks had been performed on the purchaser, or the purchaser would then go through that background check. And what it would do then is have that background check on the individual who does not have that permit to carry or does not have that permit to purchase, and just document that transaction. So in the period of the background check, the federal license dealer would then take possession of the gun, and at the completion of that background check, if it came back for that individual who did not have a background check, or an unlicensed person who previously had not had that background check, it would then allow that transaction to take place. So quite frankly, what I'm asking you, and I hope that you all consider this, is understand that this will not restrict anyone's ability who's law-abiding to still have the opportunity to purchase a gun between two private individuals. It would just document that background check took place. And for those of you who are knowledgeable, you do know that dealers, after a period, destroy that transaction that takes place. So I would ask for your support on this amendment, and thank you all.
Discussion to the amendment. The member from Blue Earth, Representative Cornish.
Mr. Speaker and members, Representative Dean, first of all, the number of killings that you mentioned in around in the different districts, and none of them would have been stopped by a background check. And it's a typical reaction of a liberal who doesn't like, I know we shouldn't say doesn't like guns, but doesn't like freedom of gun rights, is to purport that a background check is actually going to do something, because it doesn't. None of those crimes would have been stopped. Accidents at the home, when one child accidentally kills another, it's usually in responsibility of the owner. It's nothing to do with a background check. Robbery, and a lot of the killings are caused by gangbangers who would never pass a check. They get the guns anyway. So, and you asked if, you said this wasn't a solution to all the problems. This isn't a solution to any of the problems. This is just a red herring thrown out there because it's got a popular name. And it's not a gun show loophole like some people call it. The law was expressly written that way to exclusively protect private sales. It was meant that way, and that's why it's hung in there. And lastly, to quote court opinions, what frustrates gun grabbers right now is that nationwide, Supreme Court on down have been backing gun owners. Even in the high crime areas where they're trying to outlaw handguns, the court has reversed that and said you can't do that. And Minnesota is a gun state. DFLers over here, it's past the time when you can beat up on gun owners. You tried it several years ago with 16 different gun bills, and they were all pummeled down. And then you lost the majority. What are you thinking of? I mean, you're actually going to get up here and beat up gun owners again after that happened? The time has passed when owning a gun is unpopular. Guns are admired in this state, not worshiped, but admired for self-protection. And the more you do to disarm people and keep them from exercising that right, the more votes you're going to lose. You should write up this board. This is actually the easiest of the bills that I'm going to vote for today, the most non-controversial. And to throw background checks up there to think that it actually does something to reduce crime is preposterous. So please vote green on this bill, but red on the amendment.
The member from Mauer, Representative Poppy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'd like to speak in opposition to this amendment. It does penalize and negatively affect those law-abiding gun owners, sportsmen and sportswomen. It restricts gifting and selling firearms to neighbors, friends, and those who are not immediate family members, like cousins, nieces, and nephews. And many times you will hear about a shotgun that somebody wants to be able to pass down to another member of their family, and that might not be a direct son or daughter, but it might be a niece or nephew. This unnecessarily restricts these transactions. I encourage you to vote no on this amendment.
Further discussion on the amendment. The member from Cass, Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Dean, I don't know if you recall, but 2 years ago, House File number 237, if I recall, came up and it addressed this exact same issue. And it was voted down overwhelmingly by a majority of Democrats. And I think we ought to do just the same right now, and I encourage a no vote.
Further discussion on the amendment to the amendment. The member from Hennepin, Representative Dean R.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and my counterpart, Dean with no R. Members, I would ask you to support this. I'd like to do one simple clarification. This bill does not affect long guns. It doesn't affect rifles. It won't affect shotguns. Those transactions can still take place. This is specifically under statute for handguns and semi-automatic rifles.
Any further discussion on the Dean R. amendment? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 42 ayes and 85 nays, the motion does not prevail and the amendment to the amendment is not adopted. Members, we're now back on the A18 amendment, the Dean R. amendment. Any discussion on that amendment? The member from Hennepin, Representative Dean.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the main amendment, I would like to request a roll call.
A roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Dean.
So just the primary difference between this amendment and the amendment to the amendment is this does not include penalties of a misdemeanor or a gross misdemeanor for violation of that.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I noticed there are a few members that chose not to vote on the last amendment, so I'd like to have a call of the House.
Representative Thiessen moves for a call of the House. Seeing 10 hands, the clerk will take the roll. Representative Pepin.
Mr. Speaker, I move that further proceedings under the roll call be dispensed with and that the Sergeant at Arms be instructed to bring in the absent members.
Representative Pepin moves that further proceedings under the roll call be dispensed with and that the Sergeant at Arms be instructed to bring in the absent members. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails. The clerk will close the roll and the Sergeant at Arms will bring in the absent members. Further discussion on the Dean Amendment. The member from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a parliamentary inquiry.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
What actions are undertaken to bring in the absent members?
Representative Hortman, we've instructed the Sergeant at Arms to bring in the absent members. I believe we have one member that has not been excused that he will be looking for.
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. From your answer, am I to understand that if a member is excused, that the Sergeant at Arms does not go to bring the member in for the vote?
That is correct. They've been excused from this session. The member from Hennepin, Representative Mullery, to the motion, or to the amendment.
Mr. Speaker, just a actual request for information. Can the Sergeant at Arms carry guns if they go out after us?
The Speaker isn't sure. Any further discussion to the amendment? The member from Mauer, Representative Poppy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is another amendment that needs a no vote. Again, the listing of who the relatives are does not include other relatives, and I just think it's an unnecessary amendment and should be voted down.
The member from Blue Earth, Representative Cornish.
Mr. Speaker and members, like I said before, this amendment does no good to do anything actual to reduce crime or to reduce shootings. I mean, and as far as the survey that 80-some% of the people believe that background checks are necessary or that should be enacted. You know, when they take that survey, they don't explain what a background check is, how far it goes, who is exempt, who is underneath it, what it does to the families or the friends, or what the original intent was the bill. So you put out a survey, do you think background checks should be available? Everybody already undergoes one. Anytime they go to Gander Mountain or Shields or anywhere else to buy a firearm, they go through a background check. And so people are totally confused when they get the answer that, or have to answer that question. And overall, background checks historically have never been found to do any good. We had some people testify before us in committee one time, and they talked about the background checks that kept people from getting guns. And they come up with some number, I can't remember how many it was that they thought from getting guns, but they couldn't prove in one instance that it stopped one single crime. All they talked about was keeping people from getting guns. And we do that now if somebody goes through a background check. But time and time again, when you read the newspapers, you'll find out that the people that get these firearms that do harm or carnage don't go through background checks. They're the criminal element usually. And the some that do go through background checks in a crime of passion committed, but you aren't going to solve that with a background check. So background checks sounds good, and it makes you feel like you're doing something, but that's the laws that are the scariest, the ones that make you feel like you're doing something when you're actually not, and that's what gets you a red mark with gun owners. It's just flailing out there with a law that thinks it's going to do something it doesn't, and all it does is hurt the constituency. So please vote no on this amendment. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the amendment? The member from Cass, Representative Anderson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, for the same reason that we put down the amendment to the amendment, that this bill was brought up 2 years ago, House File number 237. We should vote this down again. Thank you.
The author of the amendment, the member from Hennepin, Representative Dean R.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is so far from the bill that we voted down, 237, that I find it almost unbearable that I don't break out in laughter. As I mentioned, this bill is a simple bill that will allow, or an amendment that will allow background checks for purchases and exchange between two individuals who are law-abiding citizens. You know, quite frankly, I'm a little bit dismayed at some of the discussions and some of the characterizations that are going on. And, you know, I'm not the most intelligent person, but I do know how to count to 68. And I'm not going to go on and on because I don't think it's going to change any minds of folks who are against this. But I did just want to get up and say once again that I hope you will take some consideration and vote green on the amendment. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion on the amendment, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Members, just a reminder, the House is under call. All members must vote.
Mr. Speaker.
Representative McNamara.
Mr. Speaker, will you please call the absentee members in?
The clerk will call the absent members.
Torkelson, Torkelson, and Torkelson. Pause a little bit and I'll do it. No, you. Torkelson, 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 is he here? Torkelson, 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 Torkelson.
The clerk will close the roll.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that those not voting be excused from voting.
There being 45 ayes and 84 nays, the motion does not prevail and the amendment is not adopted. Members, we're now back on the bill 1434. Any discussion to that bill? Sorry, there are no more amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File Number 1434.
Third reading. Further discussion on the bill. The member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will Representative Torkelson yield for question?
He will yield. Representative Thiessen.
Thank you. Representative Torkelson, were you out looking for Representative Peterson and Representative Mack?
No, Representative Thiessen, I was out working on buffers.
Further discussion on the bill. The member from Hennepin, Representative Mullery.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. You know, as a Metro member, I constantly hear we have to learn what it's like to live in the rest of Minnesota and to be aware of that and open to their lifestyle. Let me tell you the difference between the lifestyle in my district and the lifestyle in, let's say, Representative Zill's district. In my district, when you hear the word duck, everybody starts running for cover, they hit the ground, they run to the back rooms. Little kids are taught the minute they hear any kind of a gunshot to run into the house and get into an inner room and hit the floor. If we're in Representative Dill's district during a lot of the time of the year, when somebody yells duck, they run for their guns to go hunting. There's quite a difference between that. I am very aware of what it's like in rural Minnesota. I used to go out to friends and cousins in western Minnesota and go hunting with them, pheasant hunting. You walk in the back door and there's just a big, like a garbage can with all the shotguns and rifles. That's not the way it is in our district. We have little kids, Representative Dean mentioned some of them. I have a lot more in my district. Unfortunately, the gang activity has moved more further north, and is almost all in my district now. We have to face it as a state that we look at the different parts of the state and what's necessary in different parts of the state. This is a bill which is dangerous to kids and other people in my area, and it's about time other people start looking at what my district is, just as I have to look at what your district is when I'm voting on things. This also, people are talking about the shot spotter. Most people don't know what it is. Even people from most parts of South Minneapolis, when they're up in my district, say, what are those towers that are on that little cart? That's a shot spotter. They don't have them in probably any of your districts hardly in the state, but that helps solve crimes. In fact, just in 1 month, this is when they first went in, there were 3 felony arrests, 3 misdemeanor arrests, 2 recovered guns, a recovered stolen car, and information that led to the solution of other robberies and homicides from the shot spotters. The shot spotters contract with the city of Minneapolis specifically says that it doesn't work when there's silencers used. That means more crime, more criminals get away, more people are shot, more kids killed. I just looked at one of the Minneapolis police just for a week. The sounding of shots fired in my district alone, it picked up, I can count the different dots, 71 that I can count, and then there's a big, huge blob in a couple places, so there's no idea how many are there. This does work on stopping crime, and this is keeping it, the silencer manufacturer says it doesn't harm the shot spotter. The shot spotter manufacturer says it doesn't work with them. Who am I going to believe? So, members, when you're voting on this, we should be having an allowance of local control on something that's so dangerous as this. The author said there's no compelling need to prevent suppressors. I would say to the author, kids dying is a need, and that's more important than anything in my book. And we have to start looking at this and respecting the differences in different parts of Minnesota, just as I'm told to respect the differences when you're pushing something. Thank you.
The member from Blue Earth, Representative Cornish.
Mr. Speaker and members, the information that Representative Mullery gave is either inconsistent or inaccurate with what I've received. I talked to the sergeant of the Minneapolis Police Department in the spot shotter division, and he said that there's many times right now when shot spotters don't work anyway. A 22 possibly with a muffler on it might not work, but we haven't found any used in crimes anyway. He said that shot spotters right now might not work in an environmentally occluded area like a park with a lot of trees and alleys, certain buildings, inside of a car in a drive-by. If it's a small caliber weapon, there are already problems with shot spotters. Also, this person told me that if a firearm with a suppressor was used and entered into the database, that sound, then he thought it would be recognized. So the information isn't really accurate. Shot spotters still can work. And even if they didn't, silencers or suppressors just aren't used in crime. So thank you.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Loeffler.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. My community doesn't yet have shot spotter because we don't have that many, but it's growing. The number of gunfire shots and the number of victims is growing. And in my city, the sound of gunfire is a respected signal of potential danger. It says, be alert, seek cover. I know that's not the experience in many parts of the state. For those of you who don't have to worry about violent gunfire in your neighborhoods, please count your blessings. I wish that was true everywhere in Minnesota. I wish very young children didn't have to be trained to listen for gunfire and to respond quickly. We need the warning of that sound. Silencing that warning with suppressors will put more innocent lives at risk in our city. For that reason, I will be voting no, and I hope others will join me.
Any further discussion on the bill? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The House is under call. As a reminder, members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 89 ayes and 40 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The member from Hennepin, Representative Pepin.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the call of the House be lifted.
Representative Pepin moves that the call of the House be lifted. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails. Report from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Pepin for the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration, pursuant to Rules 1.21 and 3.33, designates the following bills to be placed on the calendar for the day for Monday, April 20th, 2015, and establishes a pre-filing requirement for amendments offered to the following bills: Senate File Number 1563 and House File Number 1725.
Motions and resolutions. There are copies of the non-controversial motions at the House desk and online. If there's no objection, we'll take action on these motions first. Hearing no objection, the motions prevail.
Simonson moved that House File Number 623 be recalled from the Committee on Job Growth and Energy Affordability Policy and Finance and be re-referred to the Committee on Capital Investment.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Simonson, to introduce your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members, and yes, this is my motion. Members, this is a bill. It's a capital investment bill having to do with Western Lake Superior Sanitary District and a combined heat and power system that they want to construct there. And this bill, when it was originally introduced earlier this session, was referred to the Committee on Job Growth and Energy. And I did, at some point in time during the session, did request a hearing in that particular committee, which I did not get. But that's not really the issue. The issue is, members, that this is without a question a capital investment bill. And all I'm trying to do here is refer it over to the capital investment committees so that they have it in their possession as we go into the interim in preparation for next year's bonding session. And it's my understanding that typically what the bonding committee, the capital investment committee, will do over the course of the interim is spend some time out in Minnesota looking at the various bonding projects that they have in their possession. So, members, in full disclosure, I have not been able to obtain approval from either chair, but at this point in time, I would ask for your support in re-referring this to the Capital Investment Committee.
The member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo, to the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and thank you, Representative Simonson. We had a good conversation about this. Members, earlier in session, I did notify the entire body on a bipartisan basis that we would not be hearing any capital investment bills in the Job Growth, Energy Affordability, Policy and Finance Committee. This is not a bonding year. That being said, when the bonding year comes along, I'm absolutely open to having hearings of members on both sides of the aisle before we make recommendations to the Capital Investment Committee on those capital investment projects that are currently in the jurisdiction of our committee. Also, I'm in the interim. I hope that one of the things that the committee will have an opportunity to do is actually visit some of these capital investment projects, again, the ones that are in the jurisdiction of our committee. And as I've told Representative Simonson privately, combined heat and power is something that allows tremendous energy efficiency. I think there's a benefit to everybody, and particularly the Duluth project has some definite merits. But again, nothing against this project, nothing against the author, but this not being a bonding session, this committee will not be hearing any capital investment bills in this committee this session, and that's something that I notified members of months ago. So should we end up taking a vote on this motion, I would urge members to vote no. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Dean R.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to Representative Garofalo's point, early on when I asked about getting a hearing for a bill in capital investment, I was told that the only bills we would hear were bills that went through other committees first. And now I'm hearing from a chair of another committee that he was not going to hear any bills during this year. So in essence, what we've done is we've said that capital investment this year doesn't matter, which I think is a terrible thing to do. We have important projects that are critical for the state of Minnesota, and I think that when the majority shuts down the ability of bills to get hearing, that's not a good thing for the people of Minnesota. I'd ask you to support this, this motion to move this bill.
The member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Again, Mr. Speaker, and to the previous member, it's not what I said. What I said was that we were going to give members of both sides of the aisle a fair chance at having hearings on this, but as we notified members of the body earlier this session, we are not hearing any capital investment bills this session in this committee.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Simonson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And Mr. Speaker, I'm wondering if Chair Garofalo will yield to a question.
He will yield. Representative Simonson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Chair Garofalo. My question to you is, if we leave this particular bill in the possession of your committee as we go over the interim, can you assure me that when we come back in 2016, that you will have a full hearing on House File number 623? Could you assure me of that, Representative Garofalo?
The member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Simonson, while I generally do not like to answer hypothetical and speculative questions, I would tell you that the chair is enthusiastic about combined heat and power, and I'm interested in this. That being said, if actions were taken by the city of Duluth or others so the project was no longer needed, if it was fully financed or federal financing became available, then I could promise you I would not hear it because the issue would be resolved. But Representative Simonson, I can tell you, while I don't like to answer speculative questions, it's something I'm interested in. We're probably going to hear, like 90% chance we're going to hear. And actually, I think I'd like to have the committee go up there this summer to take a look at it. But I'm not going to promise you I'm going to hear it. So.
Representative Simonson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if Chair Garofalo will yield for one more question.
He will yield. Representative Simonson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Chair Garofalo. You know, I'm trying to be as nice about this as I can, and I'm going to really try to get to the point of the question here. But I don't think it's just this bill. I think that there's a number of capital investment bills that are out there floating around, sitting in various committees, and I understand that there's a process or there's a method to your madness, perhaps. But If you could just speak to the point that when we come back in 2016, and that's speculation, but if we did come back in 2016, and if the bill author happened to request a committee hearing on a capital investment project, you'd be open to that? Could you answer that, Chair Garofalo?
Representative Garofalo.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Simonson, yes, I am open to hearing requests for bills. I would say the intent that we've done in previous sessions is the individual committees make recommendations to the Capital Investment Committee on which capital investment projects should be included or not included. Certainly that would be the plan for our committee, is that we would not only hear your bill but other capital investment bills to make those recommendations to the Capital Investment Committee.
Representative Simonson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And will the chair of the Capital Investment Committee yield?
He will yield. Representative Simonson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Chair Torkelson. My question to you is along a similar track. I'm just curious, if you could kind of lay out your plans as chair of the Capital Investment Committee, what your plans are for the interim. Are you going to be going out and touring across Minnesota and kind of reviewing some of these projects? And a follow-up to that question will be, maybe you can answer them both at the same time, will be, what are you going to do about these bills that are sitting in other committees? Are they on your radar? Can you assure us, can you assure the members here that the bills that they have that should be in capital investment at some point in time are on your radar and could possibly be included in your tour over the interim?
The member from Brown, Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Simonson. My calendar has been full virtually every day this session. If your project proposers would like to meet with me, please get on my schedule. I'd be happy to meet with them and discuss some of the details of the project. That's where I have not closed my door to anyone. Yes, we do plan on touring projects this summer. We probably haven't got time to see every single project that is in bill form, but my CAI and I and our Vice Chair will be picking out the projects we think are appropriate for us to spend committee time on, visit them this summer, get a good hands-on, eyeballs-on look at the projects so that we can judge the projects in a more forthright fashion and put together a bill we can all be proud of.
Representative Simonson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Chair Torkelson. Mr. Speaker, if the chair will yield for one more question.
He will yield. Representative Simonson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Chair Torkelson. I understand where you're coming from, and I also understand that the Capital Investment Committee could certainly not take on and review every single project that's out there over the course of the interim. That's a little excessive, but I just want to ensure not only myself but other members that have bills sitting in other committees that if speculation again, if we come back in 2016 and these bill authors have their bills heard in these other committees and they're referred over to the bonding committee, how can you assure me that not only my bills but these other bills now are on your radar screen for potential inclusion in your bonding tour this summer?
Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Simonson. We are tracking bills that are introduced with bonding language in them, and when the appropriate time comes that we are going to start considering bills for a bonding bill, then we will probably reach out to various committee chairs to make sure those bills get to our committee. I would remind you that there's no requirement that a bill be heard in committee for it to be included in a bonding bill. So my door's open, my phone works, I'm listening to people every day that have bonding proposals. Some people I listen to every day and multiple times a day. So my ear gets bent a lot. I don't mind that a bit. I'm happy to listen to projects and, as I said earlier, try to put together a bill we can all be proud of. Thank you.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen, to the motion.
Thank you. Will Representative Pepin yield to a question?
She will yield. Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Representative Pepin. We've just heard that Representative Garofalo is going to do an extensive tour of sites around the state that are in his jurisdiction for the bonding committee. We just heard Representative Torkelson is going to do an extensive tour of the state with his committee, which is all going to cost money. I was just wondering what kind of committee budgets the committees are going to have to be able to do that when you're cutting staff by nearly $3 million, $2 or $3 million. Are we going to be letting these junkets go around the state so Representative Garofalo can take these trips? while we're doing that, we're going to be cutting staff? Or wouldn't it be better for us to actually pay for a few more staff and not let Representative Garofalo go on these trips?
Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Thiessen. As you know, the state government bill is working its way through the process, and we'll be continuing to look at committee budgets. And of course, as I mentioned yesterday, it's our job to be good fiduciaries of state dollars, and that's why we all want to make sure that every dollar that we use, that we get from our taxpayers, is spent in the wisest way possible. So we will continue to look at that, continue to work through the process, and continue to make sure we're good stewards of taxpayer dollars.
Representative Thiessen.
Thank you. Well, Representative or Majority Leader Pepin and Speaker Dowd and other members who are going to be deciding this, I would urge you to reconsider your cuts to the staff and not let Representative Garofalo go on his junkets.
Further discussion on the motion. The member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
Mr. Chairman, would Representative Torkelson yield to a question?
He will yield. Representative Carlson.
Representative Torkelson, my question is this. I know that the majority party at this point in time has taken a stance of no bonding bill. By way of a little background, I remember in the mid-'80s, we had been in the majority, we went into the minority, and your caucus took a position of no bonding bill. Now, we didn't have a capital investment committee at the time. We did everything through appropriations. I chaired a finance committee prior to that of appropriations. And so that stance went right up to near the end, and Governor Perpich was taking basically the same stance that Governor Dayton is. He wanted a bonding bill. And in the closing days of the session, there was a decision that there would be a bonding bill. And so I get a call to go up to the chair of the Appropriations Committee's office, a woman by the name of Mary Forsyth from Edina. And she said, Lynn, if we were to put a bonding bill together, what would you suggest is in it? Because there had been no hearings. And interestingly enough, that became a big part of the bonding bill, and I was just taking projects off the top of my head. So getting to the question that I have, how well prepared will you be if in the waning hours with those negotiations that come at the end, if there's an agreement to have a bonding bill at some level to know what projects to include this year? And I ask that question because I've got a couple of bills in your committee, 3 in fact, I think. One has been given a hearing, and the other 2 have not. And so, Representative Torkelson, how prepared will you be at the last hour if you get the word that there's going to be a bonding bill at some level?
Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Carlson. Well, Representative Carlson, if you're hoping to be invited to my office to write the bonding bill, I would not hold your breath. That's probably not going to happen this time. You're lucky enough to do it in the past, but probably won't happen this time around. I was a 4-H'er as a kid. You know, I spent 10, 12 years in the 4-H program and loved every minute of it. My brother was a Boy Scout, and I kind of learned a little bit. Even though I wasn't a Boy Scout, I learned a little bit from my brother. The Boy Scout motto is be prepared, and I assure you, Representative, I will be prepared.
Representative Carlson.
Mr. Chairman, just to comment, I wasn't soliciting to go to your office. I was just giving you a little history, and the point I was making is that sometimes things happen at the last minute. And so my question was, how well would you be prepared? And so you may have been a Boy Scout, and you may have gone by that motto, and I was a Boy Scout, and I did as well. I try to be prepared, but I don't know that we need to talk about our old Boy Scout days here. But this is a pretty serious question that I am asking when I say how well will you be prepared, because my follow-up question, Representative Torkelson, is at that point in time you may be prepared, but what will be the opportunity then for the minority caucus to have input into what's ultimately decided to be in a bonding bill this session if it should happen? And I'm not on your committee, so I'm not soliciting going up there. I was on appropriations in those days, but I did spend a number of years on capital investment, but I'm not currently. So Representative Torkelson, from the standpoint of members on this side of the aisle, how do we get input then if that were to happen in the waning days of the session?
Representative Torkelson.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Carlson. I can count to 81, and I can't count to 81 on this side of the aisle, so I assure you that the voices on your side of the aisle will be heard. As I noted with Representative Simonson, I've had lots of traffic through my office. If you have something you would like to bring to my attention, please get on my calendar, and I'll be happy to spend some time with you discussing projects. And I anticipate that coming this summer, assuming I get a budget, of course, that we will be touring various projects in the state, and that we will be having robust hearings next session as we assemble a bonding bill next session. I believe that our budget, as I understand it, does include debt service money for next year, and that's where we're headed at the moment.
Representative Carlson.
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad that you will be soliciting, if it were to happen, some input from this side of the aisle. I guess my disappointment, as I mentioned, and I'm just going to refer to me personally, because I don't know how many others have had requests for a hearing, but I've had requests in for a hearing on, like I say, 3 capital investment projects that are in my general area. You did hear one, and then all of a sudden the committee just shut down. And so my disappointment is that there wasn't some hearings in preparation for putting a bill together if it were to happen, or quite frankly, preparation for hearings where you might be visiting and seeing the projects firsthand if you are going to, during the interim, travel into different parts of the state. This is a very important issue, the bonding, and I think we should give some thought, and I hope you do too, in terms of how well prepared as an old Boy Scout then you are if it comes to be near the end of the session.
Members, just as a reminder, we're on the Simonson motion, which would move House File 623 from the Committee on Job Growth and Energy Affordability Policy and Finance and be re-referred to the Committee on Capital Investment. If we could keep our comments to that motion. The member from Fillmore, Representative Davids.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'm a bit concerned about some of the rhetoric being used when we call various information gathering trips as junkets. I would hope that Chair Hausman would be a bit insulted by that comment, because I'll tell you what, I've been on the bonding committee since before a lot of folks in this room were born. I'm not this year, but I have a lot of respect for what the bonding committee does. And Chair Hausman, you work just like dogs. And that's what we wanted. The tours that you and your staff put together were very, very important for the bonding bill. I hope we don't refer to those as junkets, because if we go on tours to study the issues, they can't be junkets when they were good, productive tours that we had under the leadership of Chair Hausman. So I hope we can tone the rhetoric down just a bit on this issue, because I believe that Chair Torkelson will have a robust tour and robust hearings next year, and I think that's the way it should be. So hopefully we don't get caught up in the rhetoric of calling things junkets when they are really necessary to make a good decision. Members, we'll be looking next year at spending $850 million. We had better go out and look at those projects. Chair Hausman, you've done a great job in the past on those tours. Up early, work until late. We need to see these projects. So I hope we don't go down the road of calling very necessary trips across the state junkets. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Thiessen to the Simonson motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just to clarify for Representative Davids, I was talking about Representative Garofalo's committee, who was going to take those same trips that Representative Torkelson's committee is taking. And I agree with you that we should make sure that we can make the best decisions possible. But to have two committees making the exact same trip, seems like a waste of money, particularly when we're cutting the staff that would let us make the best decisions possible. So Representative Davids, I hope that you stand up and also make an argument that we shouldn't be cutting our staff, because they do great work and they help us make the right decisions. And I'll be expecting you to be making that speech on the floor when we have the state government bill before us.
Any further discussion on the Simonson motion? The member from St. Louis, Representative Simonson, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And just to bring us back to where we started, my entire intent was just to make sure that this particular bill was on the radar screen of the Capital Investment Committee. So in the event that they did take a well-intentioned and productive tour around the state of Minnesota through the interim, that hopefully it would get some attention. So I would encourage a yes vote.
Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the Simonson motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The motion does not prevail.
Simonson moves that House File number 1084 be recalled from the Committee on Job Growth and Energy Affordability Policy and Finance and be re-referred to the Committee on Capital Investment.
The member from St. Louis, Representative Simonson, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Different House file, same argument, same discussion. I would encourage a yes vote.
Any discussion on the Simonson motion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor of the Simonson motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The motion does not prevail.
Bly moves that the rules of the House be so far suspended that House File number 2225 be recalled from the Committee on Agricultural Finance, be given its second and third readings, and be placed upon its final passage.
The member from Rice, Representative Bly, to your motion.
Yes, I'd like a roll call, please.
A roll call has been requested. Seeing more than 15 hands, there will be a roll call.
So in this motion, I would like to bring House File 2225 before the floor so that we can vote on it. This is the bill that deals with the avian flu crisis that's affecting a lot of turkey farms in, I believe it's 26 farms that have been affected so far. And this is costing millions of dollars. But the bill itself would allocate money that the governor has requested to deal with the emergency, and staff that are working around the clock to try to figure out what's going on. We do not yet know what is the cause of the flu to these animals, and we want to make sure that that's possible. There's also money going to the Board of Animal Health to support them in their efforts in the immediate time. So I would move that we have suspension of the rules so that we can bring this bill forward.
The member from Cottonwood, Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Bly, for bringing this forward. And I'm going to ask everybody to support this motion. And before that, Mr. Speaker, thank you for your leadership on this as well. And Madam Majority Leader, we recognize you this morning in committee as well. Everybody has taken this very, very seriously. I had a very nice conversation with Chair Knobloch, Chair of Ways and Means. We wanted to pull this off of Ways and Means Committee agenda today. Because Chair Anderson had an excellent hearing this morning, and we had, I tell you what, we had just very, very influential people around this. And I want to ensure the public that our food supply is safe. You take a look at the Department of Agriculture, you take a look at the Board of Animal Health, the University of Minnesota with the VDL. We have so many talented and wonderful people addressing this. I can't say enough about everybody's involvement. I also want to thank the governor for his leadership on this. Senator Sparks was in our committee hearing this morning. The Senate's taken it very, very seriously as well. And this is the reason, my friends, our colleagues, this is the reason why I am so honored to be able to chair the Agriculture Committee. I mean, this is a bipartisan, if not nonpartisan committee. It's wonderful how everybody works together, not only rural members, but the metro members as well. we're going to have a great, solid ag bill when it's all said and done. There's so much thanks to go all the way around. Representative Miller, thank you so much for your leadership on this. I know this was your amendment in committee, and I also understand that you introduced a bill similar, so I can't thank you enough for your leadership on this. There's so much credit to go around, my friends. Once again, I'm simply going to say thank you, Representative Bly, for bringing this forward. I'm going to ask everybody to support this motion, and let's vote green. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the motion? The member from Candy Ojai, Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Bly, I thank you for bringing this forward. This is an identical bill to my House File 2224. And as was discussed in committee this morning, this is really important, and I can tell you this is very important for my district and my area. I live in basically the center of turkey production here in the state of Minnesota, and I can assure you that this has been very devastating. A lot of people spoke this morning. There is the DNR, the Board of Animal Health, the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, the USDA. There are members from both sides of this aisle. There are producers. There are so many different people that are working together. Members of this House, this is very important to our state, and it's growing bigger. It's becoming a problem. I think the Minnesota Department of Agriculture is doing a fantastic job. So is the Board of Animal Health and everyone else working towards this, the Turkey Diagnostic Center in Wilmer. We have a lot of people that are doing a lot of good things, and I would appreciate help on this crisis at this time. Thank you.
The member from Lyon, Representative Swedzinski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members. I just also want to thank Representative Baker and Representative Miller on their work on this as being a large part of our rural economy. I've had a farm affected by this. I appreciate your focus on this issue, members, and thank you.
The member from Pope, Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thanks to those that are supporting this. Thanks to Chair Hamilton for his agreement to do this, and to leadership for realizing the importance of this situation. And as Representative Bly mentioned, there are now 26 flocks that have been affected. The first one, not that it's a good thing, but it was in my area, in my home county. And not only the loss of the turkeys, but this farmer, this neighbor of mine, is what they call the breeder, that he provides the eggs that provide the chicks that keep the industry going. And he's going to lose more than 1 year's production out of this. So we need to think about the producers themselves as well, and try to help them as well. There is going to be some money from a USDA. We had the chief veterinarian at our meeting this morning. And so working with federal, state, and local people, we have a pretty good handle on this right now. But again, thank you all for your support and agreement that this is important enough that we need to move on this quickly and get this funding done. Thanks, Mr. Speaker.
The member from Sherburne, Representative Knobloch.
Well, Mr. Speaker, members, as Chair of the Ways and Means Committee, I just want to tell people that the reason we did pull this from the calendar today, and I had called lead Carlson to talk about this yesterday, is that this is a very fast-moving and very serious issue, and we were aware that there was a significant hearing on the avian flu crisis taking place in the Agriculture Policy Committee today. I guess I didn't think it was appropriate to take up the Agriculture Finance Committee or the Agriculture Finance Bill in Ways and Means today when we were still gathering more information, but it is certainly my intent to take this important bill up next week, the Agriculture Finance Bill overall. I think that the money that's being appropriated in this bill, House File 2225, is money that we would certainly be appropriating anyway in the Agriculture Finance Committee. So I urge suspension of the rules, support for this bill. And members, we will be taking up the Agriculture Finance Bill next week with further recommendations from Chair Carlson on what to do on this important issue.
The member from Mauer, Representative Poppy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and I'd like to thank Representative Bly for doing this today, or bringing this forward, and I know that there is across the aisle much support, and I would also like to thank Governor Dayton. I think he's just been such a strong and firm leader on this, and making every effort to do what he can do and to move everything along. We've had great response by Dr. Hartman, the Board of Animal Health, Commissioner Frederickson, the Department of Ag, the University of Minnesota, but the people on the ground, the producers and farmers who every day are waking up hoping that their flock of turkeys is still alive in the barn. And that's just, I mean, the testimony we heard today and that we've heard from farmers in the past, it's just very, very distressing. So to have them be aware that we are trying to do something and that we're trying to be responsive, I appreciate the opportunity today for us to suspend the rules, to move this forward, and to get some action taken. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the motion? The member from Rice, Representative Bly.
Thank you, Speaker, and I want to thank the supportive speeches that have come forward, and it was a very emotional hearing this morning, and we heard from many people, as was said, and we heard over and over again that this was an unprecedented avian flu situation. It's not been experienced before, and Minnesota right now is the epicenter of this crisis. So it's very imperative that we take care of this right now. This bill really is money for the immediate emergency kind of spending, the overtime pay, the things that help the people who are doing this right now. There will be more money, thanks to Representative Hansen, Representative Poppy, and many others who recognize the urgency of this. So there will be future money in the bill overall, but the suspension of the rules is so important, I think, because this is an active thing happening right now, and we need to address it, and that's the reason for the state of urgency. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll.
We have some. Okay.
Clerk will close the roll. There being 129 ayes and 0 nays, the motion prevails.
Pursuant to Article 4, Section 19 of the Constitution of the State of Minnesota, Bly moved that the rule therein be suspended and an urgency be declared so that House File Number 2225 be given its second and third readings and be placed upon its final passage.
The member from Rice, Representative Bly, to your motion.
Thank you again for your support on this bill, and please vote green, and let's get the money to where it needs to be going. Thank you very much. Let's have a roll call. No.
Any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its second reading.
Second reading, House File Number 2225.
Second reading. Any further discussion? Seeing no discussion, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File Number 2225.
Third reading. Any further discussion on the bill? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Clerk will close the roll. There being 129 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. Announcements. The member from Mille Lacs, Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a reminder to members of the Legislative Audit Commission that we meet tomorrow afternoon at 1 p.m. in 300 North. Thank you.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Dabney.
Mr. Speaker, privilege of the House.
State your privilege of the House.
Mr. Speaker, this morning's Star Tribune had a report on the majority's proposal regarding local government aid. And in it, the esteemed chair of the House Tax Committee states, and I quote, "You wonder how it got to the point that Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Duluth are getting so much more than other cities across the state per capita." Mr. Speaker, I rise on a point of order because it's incumbent upon members of this body to be accurate in their statements and for us, under motion or privilege of the House, to correct errant media reports. It's a common myth that Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Duluth are somehow inappropriately enriched through the local government aid program, even though the percentage of local government aid that the metro districts, metro cities receive have been declining over the last number of years, and declined 2 years ago when our party reformed the local government aid system. But because this is a common myth, I think it's important that we all understand the truth about that system. There are 852 cities in the state of Minnesota. Of those 852, 770 receive aid under the local government aid system. Of those 770, 113 cities, 113 receive more local government aid on a per capita basis than the city of Duluth. 417 of those cities receive more local government aid on a per capita basis than does the city of St. Paul. Over half of the cities in the state receive more local government aid on a per capita basis than the city that we serve in today. And of those 770 cities, 449 cities across the state receive more local government aid on a per capita basis than my home city of Minneapolis. I think it's important that we correct the record and that we have our debates based not on myth, not on misinformation, but on the facts. So members, the cities that receive more local government aid on a per capita basis than my home city of Minneapolis include Aiken, McGregor, Audubon, Frazee, Lake Park, Bemidji, Black Duck, Kelleher, Foley, Beardsley, Clinton, Correll, Graceville, Johnson, Odessa, Ortonville, Amboy, Eagle Lake, Good Thunder, Lake Crystal, Mapleton, St. Clair, Vernon Center, Comfrey, Hanska, New Ulm, Sleepy Eye, Springfield, Barnum, Carlton, Moose Lake, Scanlon, Bena, Cass Lake, Pillager, Pine City, Clara City, Maynard, Milan, Montevideo, Watson, Rush City, Schaefer, Stacy, Barnesville, Glendon, Howley, Hitterdall, Ullin, Bagley, Clearbrook, Gonvick, Jeffers, Mountain Lake, Stoughton, Westbrook, Wyndham, Brainerd, Crosby, Ironton, Claremont, Dodge Center, Hayfield, Mantorville, West Concord, Brandon, Evansville, Kensington, Osakis, Blue Earth, Bryceland, Delavan, Elmore, Frost, Keister, Mountain Lake, Walters, Wells, Winnebago, Canton, Chatfield, Harmony, Lanesboro, Mabel, Ostander, Peterson, Preston, Rushford, Spring Valley, Wyckoff, Albert Lee, Alden, Clarks Grove, Emmons.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Freeborn, Glenville.
Representative Dean, for what purpose do you rise?
Point of order.
State your point of order, Representative Dean.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Dabney is rising under personal privilege, Section 222 of Masons. They're not entitled to the floor unless a question of personal privilege, unless that subject that they propose to present relates to them personally in their respective position. Representative Dabney is obviously just reading from some list that doesn't relate to that. It's not a privilege of the House.
Mr. Speaker.
Representative Dabney, for what purpose do you rise?
Mr. Speaker, the member who just spoke spoke in error. I did not rise under a point of personal privilege. I rose under a privilege of the House. Masons Section 221, subsection H, related to the conduct of reporters or the press, or, in this case, the accuracy of published reports. Mr. Speaker, Heartland.
Do you have advice, Representative Dabney?
Mr. Speaker, advice. I rose not under a point of personal privilege, but under a privilege of the House. Masons 221, section H. Specifically, conduct of reporters of the press, or, in this case, the accuracy of published reports. I am demonstrating, and the custom and usage in this House is to allow people to establish a broad base. I'm establishing that the quote in today's Star Tribune newspaper is an error, and I'm correcting the record.
Is there any further advice on the point of order?
Mr. Speaker, there is advice. The point of order was risen under the wrong section.
Representative Thiessen.
Thank you. There's actually no valid point of order before you because Representative Dabney rose under a different privilege than Representative Dean rose under. Representative Dean rose under is raising a point of order under something that's irrelevant. There's really not a point of order even before the House. You don't have to rule on anything.
Representative Dean, can you repeat the section that you were raising your point of order under?
Mr. Speaker, I was raising it under Section 222. Representative Dabney, I believe, earlier brought up the question of personal privilege. He may have misspoken. Apparently, we have had a lot of people who are listening more closely and taking notes over there. But I would also relate to Section 220, questions of privilege in general. It's necessary that the question under immediate control of the body, that relate to the rights and privileges of the body and not to its members. Obviously, Representative Dabney is trying to take us on some diversionary lane around highways, byways, and off-ramps around the state of Minnesota. I'm not sure why, but I don't think that it's clear under either section where Representative Dabney is going.
Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, advice?
Representative Dabney, I am actually going to defer ruling. I appreciate your creativity, and I understand what you're trying to do. I believe that you are rising under a privilege of the House, 221 Section H, which is the conduct of reporters or the press and the accuracy of published reports. My question, and this is a rhetorical question, it seems to me that you are more referring to the accuracy of a statement a member made, not necessarily that the press or the reporter is inaccurate. So I am going to defer the ruling, and I'm going to let you continue if you want to. But I will remind you that Section H talks about the accuracy of the press or published reports, and I believe, if I heard you correctly, that you don't like what another member said to the media. And that certainly would run afoul of the comments that you're making here. So I'm going to allow you to continue, but certainly I do reserve the right to rule if I'm inaccurate there.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the connection here is that the quote in the newspaper, the accuracy of the published report is inaccurate. Mr. Speaker, as I was saying, Howley, we'll skip around here. Kenyon, Wanamingo, Ashby, Elbow Lake, Herman, Hoffman, Norcross, Wendell, Osseo, Caledonia, Hoka, Houston, Spring Grove, Bram, Big Fork, Bovee, Calumet, Coleraine, Deer River, Keewatin, Marble, Nashawk, Alpha, Heron Lake, Jackson, Lakefield, Okabena, Wilder, Mora, Ogilvie, Atwater, Candy Ojai, New London, Pennock, Raymond, Sunburg, Wilmer, Hallock, Halma, Humboldt, Carlsted, Kennedy, Lake Bronson, Lancaster, St. Vincent, Big Falls, International Falls, Little Fork, North Ulm, Bellingham, Boyd, Dawson, Madison, Marietta, Nassau, Silver Bay, Two Harbors, Baudette, Williams, Cleveland, Kasota, Kilkenny, Le Center, Le Sueur, Montgomery, Waterville, Arco, Hendricks, Ivanhoe, Lake Benton, Tyler, Ballatin, Cottonwood, Florence, Garvin, Ghent, Minneota, Russell, Taunton, Tracy, Bijou, Monoman, Waban, Alvarado, Argyle, Grigula, Holt, Middle River, Newfolden, Oslo, Stephan, Strandquist, Viking, Warren, Salon, Donnell, Fairmont, Granada, Northrop, Sherburne,
Mr. Speaker.
Tremont, Truman. Welcome.
Representative Dean, for what purpose do you rise?
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
State your point of order, Representative Dean.
Mr. Speaker, I rise under Mason Section 112. Members do not have the right to have acts, journals, accounts, or papers read. The delay and the interruption that this might cause demonstrates the impossibility of the existence of such a right. Representative Dabney is obviously reading this to cause a delay. For what purpose, I don't know. But I think we understand where this is going. So it's Mason's. I'll try this one under Section 112.
Any further advice? Representative Thiessen, state your advice.
Thank you. Representative Dean didn't read the whole rule. The rule is never rigorously enforced. And so I would suggest that you find the point of order not well taken. I think Representative Dabney probably would be done with his list if you wouldn't keep interrupting him. So I would urge you to find the point of order not well taken.
Mr. Speaker, advice?
State your advice.
Mr. Speaker, if you look further in Mason Section 112, Section 3, all members should have as much information as possible on every question upon which they are to vote. The current property tax division report includes local government aid language in it and appropriations. That will be coming before the body. It is currently before the local government, excuse me, the division, the property tax and local government division. Members deserve that information. And again, Mr. Speaker, I rise under Mason's 221, subsection H, related to the accuracy of published reports. I am establishing that the report in today's Star Tribune is inaccurate, and I am correcting that record for the benefit of the members of this body, as well as all Minnesotans. The custom and usage in this body is to allow members to establish a broad base in debate, and I am well within the traditions and customs of this body.
Mr. Speaker, advice.
Representative David, state your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My advice would be that what I said in the paper about Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Duluth getting more per capita, I would just like to correct the record for the body, for Representative Dabney, for the state of Minnesota, what it should have read, what I should have said, is Minneapolis, St. Paul, Duluth get more per capita than the average per capita amount for all other cities. That would wrap it up, and I think that can that would be a more accurate statement. I agree with Representative Dabney. I do want accuracy. I do want to be quoted accurately, and I hope that can clear it up. I didn't go quite far enough. In a lot of press reports I've been doing, I've been saying above the statewide average, but technically, what I'll be saying from now on is that Minneapolis, St. Paul, Duluth get more per capita than the average per capita amount for all other cities. That is an accurate statement. I want to correct the record, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Advice.
Representative Khan, I always appreciate your advice.
Yes. Well, specifically, as you recall, custom and usage takes precedence over Masons, and I believe that many, many members stand on the House floor and read from a piece of paper. I wouldn't be surprised if Representative Dean himself may have done it.
Advice, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Erickson, state your advice.
This is my advice, Mr. Speaker and members. If you read Section 221, Privilege of the House, and the clause to which Representative Dabney refers, it is the responsibility of the press to report accurately. What Representative Davids said was indeed a direct quote and an opinion, and it was the responsibility of the press, which is I think what this refers to ensure that that was accurate. So they should have gone ahead and checked with others like Representative Dabney, who serves on property taxes, and would have found out whether or not this was accurate. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The member from Washington, Representative Dean, state your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Advice, I would just state that the section refers to documents that are going to be distributed to the body, that those be distributed to everyone so that the person who is making a motion doesn't have any information that the rest of the body doesn't have. That's why the article is actually included. But this is obviously, that next step down says that you can't just take things off the floor and read them as a form of a filibuster. And Mr. Speaker, I wouldn't have risen at all if I had the slightest hope that Representative Dabney would ever read Delwood. I would stay and listen, but hopefully it's in there. I don't think it is, but I think if we're here all day, we probably wouldn't get there. My anticipation might be that there may be another list coming up, so I would ask that you take the point of order would be well taken, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate it.
Advice. Representative Dabney, do you have further advice?
Mr. Speaker, if you let me have the floor, I'm going to start reading again.
Members, having read the rule and reviewed the information in front of me on the point of order, and having let this run probably further afoul than I should have already, and I certainly appreciate your creativity, and as much as I would love to sit here and listen to a list of 400 cities, I think you've made your point, Representative Dabney, and I'm going to find the point of order well taken. Announcements. Representative Thiessen. Representative Thiessen.
I was going to ask Representative Knobloch to yield. I see he's not here, so maybe we can wait. Maybe we can go to some of the other announcements, and we can find Representative Knobloch.
Representative Winkler. Announcements.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if Representative Dabney could yield to a question because I have an announcement.
State your announcement. Representative Winkler, state your announcement.
Mr. Speaker, it would be helpful if I could ask him to yield before I can make my announcement. I'll tell you what it is, but I want his agreement to yield first.
Representative Winkler, state your announcement. We're on announcements right now. State your announcement.
Speaker, Representative Dabney, I am intending to form a caucus, an LGA caucus, and I'd like to include only those cities that receive more money per capita, members representing those cities that receive more money per capita than Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Duluth. So Representative Dabney, I wonder if you could inform me what cities have more LGA coming in than Minneapolis, St. Paul, or Duluth so that I could form that caucus. And members, As soon as that list is read off, I will be announcing the formation of that caucus in my office right after session.
Would it be acceptable if he just read from the point where he left off? You can remember the ones he's already read. He will yield. Representative Dabney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Winkler, thank you for your question. The list, and Representative Dean, I'm more than happy to share the list with all members of the body once I have completed correcting the record. But to be clear with you, Representative Winkler, the list that I'm reading from is Minneapolis, of the 3 cities, gets the lowest per capita. This includes everyone who received more per capita than the city of Minneapolis in local government aid. Of those 770 cities that receive local government aid. Now, Representative Winkler, you'll recognize that if you have 449 cities who receive more LGA per capita than any one city, that city is below the average recipient of local government aid on a per capita basis. But, Representative Winkler, Brownton, Glencoe, Lester Prairie, Silver Lake, Stewart.
Mr. Speaker, point of order.
Winstead.
Representative Pepin, state your point of order.
Mr. Speaker, we've already ruled on this, and furthermore, I rise under 180 dilatory motions. Whenever satisfied that a member is using parliamentary tactics to obstruct business, the presiding officer should not recognize the matter, but should rule that person out of order.
Representative Pepin and Representative Dabney, again, I appreciate what you're doing. I am going to defer ruling on the motion because I already did. I'm going to allow you to answer Representative Winkler's question, but I will not allow you to read the list. You need to answer his question without reading the list. We already ruled that you couldn't do that.
Mr. Speaker.
Representative Dabney, you have the floor.
Mr. Speaker. Representative Winkler, in response to your question, Grove City, Litchfield, Watkins, Malacca, Onania.
Point of parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Speaker.
Little Falls.
Representative Anderson, state your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, what point of the legislative session are we on right now?
We are in announcements.
And Mr. Speaker, could you describe to me what announcements are?
Representative Anderson, apparently we don't have a printed list of what the announcements are. The history of this body has been items of interest to this body, change in schedule of committee meetings, caucus times, those sorts of things. That's traditionally what an announcement is in this body.
And Mr. Speaker, point of parliamentary inquiry.
Representative Anderson, state your point of parliamentary inquiry.
And Mr. Speaker, what has been the custom and usage of our body then on this issue? Has it been that they would be making an announcement of a time and a date and the item that people would need to attend, or making notice of an event to happen?
Representative Anderson, that is correct. That is the custom and usage of this body.
Mr. Speaker.
And Mr. Speaker.
Representative Anderson, for what purpose do you rise?
Mr. Speaker, I would like to, at this point, ask that we move on with the order of the business that we have of announcements. At this point, I'm not hearing from Representative Dabney any announcement. We are violating custom and usage. And Mr. Speaker, what point of order would I need to raise in order to make sure that we are on the task of announcements? That's my point of parliamentary inquiry.
Representative Anderson, an appropriate section to raise a point of order under would be Section 100. Would be Mason's Section 100. There must be a question before the House to permit debate.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Anderson, state your point of order.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to Section 100 of Mason's Manual that we need to be having our conversation about the announcements, which is part of our process right now. I think represented as advice, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice, Representative Anderson.
And Mr. Speaker, right now, all we're having is Representative Dabney reading a list that has nothing to do with announcements. It violates our custom and usage as a body, and I would ask that you would rule in favor of this point of order.
Mr. Speaker?
Do you rise for advice, Representative Dabney?
No, I've got a different point of parliamentary inquiry. I'll defer until you've resolved Representative Anderson's concerns.
Yes, we are in a point of order under Section 100 in Mason's. Is there further advice from the body? Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've actually never seen what just happened where a member asked the Speaker for the point of order on which they should rise, and it seems to me that you've already signaled that you're going to the way you're going to rule, which I think is inappropriate, excuse me. So you've essentially told Representative Anderson, because she couldn't figure it out, what point you would rule in favor of a point of order on, and I think that that's completely inappropriate and shouldn't have been done. And I think that you should reject the point of order on that ground because you've violated the House rules yourself.
Advice, Mr. Speaker?
State your advice, Representative Winkler.
Mr. Speaker, I actually have the floor. I only yielded to Representative Dabney for a question, and the purpose of the question is to know the cities that have more LGA per capita than Minneapolis so that I could announce the formation of my caucus to the individual members based on the districts that they represent. So I was waiting for Representative Dabney to complete his list so that I could make that announcement at the end of his time on at the end of his list, make the announcement, and that would be an appropriate announcement under custom and usage and under House rules. So I would ask you to find the Anderson S. point of order not well taken.
Any further advice? Members, upon reviewing the rule in Mason's that the point of order was raised under and upon advice from numerous members, I find the point of order well taken. Announcements. Representative Thiessen, I believe you had risen for an announcement as well.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I had a couple of questions for Representative Knobloch, so if he would yield.
He will yield. Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Representative Knobloch. Representative Knobloch, can you remind me what the total spending in the 2014-15 biennium is?
The member from Sherburne, Representative Knobloch.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Representative Thiessen, as I recall, the February forecast had it at $39.3 billion. Now that doesn't include any of the proposed changes that have been made so far, such as the omnibus transportation bill that passed today out of Ways and Means, which had $228 million of spending in 14-15, or the deficiency bill that we passed earlier, or any other spending in 2015 that may come to pass, such as, for example, the House File 2225 that Representative Bly just brought forward today.
Representative Thiessen.
And if Representative Knobloch will continue to yield.
He will yield. Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Representative Knobloch. I had some questions about just how some of the, as we're kind of bringing these omnibus bills through and looking at the spreadsheets and the bills, and I'm confused about some things. For instance, in the environment bill, there is money taken from the closed landfill fund, and then in 2016 and 17, that money is deposited into a special revenue fund, and then in 2016-17, AIS spending to counties is paid out of that special revenue fund. It was the general fund before. We're moving it to a special revenue fund for one biennium, and then 2018-19, we're putting it back into the general fund. So I guess my question is, first of all, do you consider that $18 million in AIS spending to be general fund spending, since we spent it in the general fund in 14-15, we spent it in the general fund in 18-19, but we're not spending it in the general fund in 2016-17. So is that general fund spending? And why are you creating this special fund for just one biennium for that money? It doesn't make any sense to me why you would go to all the work of creating a new special fund just for one biennium to spend that $18 million.
The member from Sherburne, Representative Knobloch.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Thiessen. You know, Representative Thiessen, I'm not a voting member of the Environment Committee. I have had discussions with Chair McNamara about his bill, the Omnibus Environment Bill, but that bill hasn't yet come to the Ways and Means Committee, and I have to confess that I haven't read through every last page of it. If you could, I'd ask that perhaps you ask Representative McNamara that question instead of me, because I'm not familiar with all the details that you're exactly talking about.
Will Representative McNamara yield?
He will yield. Representative Thiessen. Thank
you. So Representative McNamara, why just for one biennium are you taking what we spent for general fund for AIS, an important project? In 2014-15, it was general fund spending, the same amount, $18 million. In 2018-19 in your budget, it's going to be general fund spending.
Mr. Speaker.
Seriously?
Representative Newberger, for what purpose do you rise?
What point are we on right now?
We are on announcements.
Mr. Speaker.
Representative Newberger.
I'll withdraw that for right now.
Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative McNamara. So why are we creating a special fund for just one biennium, and you're putting in the general fund in the biennium before and after? That just, it seems like a lot of extra work to go to, a lot of more complexity, a lot less transparency for the people of Minnesota to understand what's happening with the spending we're doing. This is clearly general fund spending. It seems to me you're trying to hide it or call it something else for one biennium for some reason, and it confuses me.
Representative McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Thiessen, you are right. The AIS is being funded in this biennium, the coming biennium, from the AIS or from the Special Revenue Fund, and in the next biennium, it's general fund. You are right. Thank you for asking that question. We've had a few people ask about it. Members, enough is enough. Don't belittle the importance of being in this body. And when you raise good questions, Representative Thiessen, you raise an honest questions. The ones before you were uncalled for. We are gifted to belong to this place, and we are blessed by the 40,000 constituents that sent us here to represent them. And we look bad on all 134 of us when we do foolish things. Foolish things, members. How do you think the people think when we act the way we do and do things so silly as some of that just went on? Representative Thiessen, I never went to law school. I only went to college for 4 years. And you're asking the right questions. But some of them were asked by people that do a lot of smart things. Don't belittle yourself by being silly and foolish. I know we've worked long days and long hours, and you all belong to be here, but think deeply about what you're doing and how silly you look. There's good questions to ask when members misspeak and they say things wrong, and they want to be honest and stand up and correct it. Move on and do the business that's before us. And Representative Thiessen, yes, it's a special revenue fund, and we're using that money, and it's a great purpose. AIS is very important, and we're funding it, and we're getting it out to the counties where they can do the good work. And yes, there's not enough money in that fund to do it in the next biennium, so we're using general fund in the next biennium. Thank you for the question.
Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the question I was asking is why we were doing it. I think this is actually back a question more appropriate for Representative Knobloch if he would yield again.
He will yield. Representative Thiessen.
And the question is, because we have $300 million sitting on the bottom line, Representative McNamara just said how important this AIS program is, and yet he's being forced to do things we do. And I know that you were last Ways and Means Chair when we were facing a very serious deficit, and so maybe that's where your head is. We actually have a $2 billion surplus. We have $300 million sitting on the bottom line, and yet you're forcing Representative McNamara to go through some huge contortions to take money from the general fund, create a special fund, put the money in the special fund, then take it back out of the special fund, put it in the general fund. There must be some reason that you want to do that. I think I know what the reason is. It's that for some reason you want to pretend to the people of Minnesota that you're keeping your budget under $40 billion for some reason, even though you know that that spending is general fund spending. The AIS spending, that $18 million that Representative McNamara says is so important, that's clearly general fund spending. The people of Minnesota, you're trying to somehow, for some reason, fool the people of Minnesota instead of making clear, transparent budgets, giving Representative McNamara another $18 million from that $300 million bottom line so that he can do something I think he would rather do, which is actually just spend it from the general fund and not go through these contortions. I do have another question for Representative Knobloch.
I think I already said
yes,
that he would yield, and I'm
Thank
waiting
you.
for your question. Go ahead, Representative Thiessen.
And this has to do with the state government bill. In the state government bill, we fund things like the councils of color, Black Minnesotans Council, the Chicano, the Asian Pacific, all of those councils. They've been funded from the general fund for years and years and years and years. This year, however, Representative Anderson's bill takes money out of CGIP, the reserve out of CGIP, another fund that's not the general fund. Now, money that you did, the same thing you did in 2003 and 2005, and we were fined by the federal government about $5 million for doing it. But nonetheless, that's what Representative Anderson is doing. She's taking that money and creating three pools, three separate funds that are not general fund, they're new special funds. One is for all the councils of color. She's depositing this money into that general fund money in 14, 15. It goes into this special revenue fund in 16, or excuse me, in whatever, 16 and 17, I guess, and then pops back out to the general fund in 18 and 19. So again, we're going through these contortions, and I'm wondering why we're doing that. Why are we taking what is clearly general fund spending, but somehow trying to hide it in a special fund?
Representative Knobloch.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Representative Thiessen, I guess, to your first question, I think you had several questions in there about the Environment Fund. I don't know, or the Environment Bill, I don't know if this is the appropriate time to get into all the details on this. I mean, we haven't had the Environment Committee come to Ways and Means, the Environment Bill come to Ways and Means yet. I do know that when you talk about the closed landfill fund, on our side of the aisle, we felt that that particular fund had been treated differently from every other fund in the state. Years ago when we had a deficit, we borrowed money from the airports fund, and we paid it back later. But we didn't pay it back with additional earnings that were based on how much the stock market had earned. No, we just paid it back with the principal that had been borrowed. And money was borrowed from the schools over the last several years. while I was gone, and then it was thankfully paid back. When we paid it back, we didn't pay it back with additional investment earnings based on what our pension funds had done. We just paid back, I believe it was the principal, maybe some additional modest interest. And so this particular fund, the closed landfill fund, is the only fund I'm aware of that we are treating in the way that we have, by paying back investment earnings on it as well. And my understanding of the bill that Chair McNamara has put together is that he doesn't take back the principal of the closed landfill fund. He just simply takes the investment earnings. And having done that this year, it'll be different, and I believe there won't be any investment earnings 2 years from now. So I imagine because of that, he's then treating it the way he is in 1819. I guess in terms of the CGIP, that was done some years ago. I don't recall the information about the fine that you're talking about. I believe that that was an idea that the Democrats in the Senate and my counterpart then and now, Senator Cohen, had and proposed, and we had a surplus then. We have a surplus now. It seems like if there's a surplus that we don't need, that it's money that the state of Minnesota can use, and that instead of just having it sit there unused, it would be good to use it. And so, again, the state government finance bill hasn't come to Ways and Means. I haven't looked through the particular language that you're referencing, but I presume by your comments that Chair Anderson is using that surplus money for a number of purposes, and that is the way and the reason it's structured that way.
Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Knobloch, thank you for that historical analysis. I think we actually did have a deficit in 2005, if I'm not mistaken. But you were the Ways and Means Chair, so you probably know better than I do. I was just I shouldn't say what I was, minority member. But you didn't answer my question, which is why you just don't, if you think that's a good idea, why don't you just take the CGIP money and put it into the general fund? Why are you creating another
Mr.
special
Speaker,
revenue
point
fund
of order.
to hide this general fund spending?
Representative Pepin, for what purpose do you rise?
Mr. Speaker, under Mason's 114, asking questions of members, Section 5, it says, a question as to what course a member proposes to follow is not in order. This is totally out of the line of where we're at. We're under announcements. Representative Thiessen is asking the course of Representative Knobloch of the direction we're going. It's completely out of order, and I ask that you would rule his announcement or whatever he's trying to do out of order.
That was 114, Section 5.
Advice, Mr. Speaker. I'm actually not asking a question of what Representative Knobloch is proposing to do. I'm asking a question of what the bills actually are saying. I'm not asking him what he's proposing to do, Representative Erickson, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Thiessen, state your advice.
I'm not doing what the rule says. I'm not asking him what course he proposes to follow. I'm asking to understand how you're putting together your budget, which is very much within the tradition and the custom and usage of this House for the minority to be able to ask questions of the leader and the Ways and Means Chair to understand what is coming forward, to understand how the process is going to move. This is very much within how we've always operated in this House. That's my advice.
Mr. Speaker.
Representative Drazkowski.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for advice on...
State your advice.
On Majority Leader Pepin's point of order. If you'll read under Section 1.14, or under Section 114 in Mason's, number 4 addresses it very clearly. Questions addressed to members may relate only to a question before the body. Mr. Speaker,
this advice is out of order because she didn't rise under that point of order.
Excuse me, Mr. Speaker, there's no question before the body.
Mr. Speaker, that's a separate point of order. Representative Pepin did not rise under that.
I am happy to be here all night listening to debate, but please wait until I recognize you to speak. I'm trying to listen intently to each member. Representative Thiessen, if you have advice, please state it now.
The advice is irrelevant because Representative Pepin didn't rise under that point of order.
Representative Thiessen, do you have advice, not comments on other members' advice?
My advice is to ignore Representative Drazkowski's advice.
Is there any further advice? Members, having reviewed the Section 114, and upon the advice of numerous members, I found the point of order well taken. Representative Pepin.
Mr. Speaker, I move we
Representative
adjourn.
Pepin.
I move we adjourn. That
Mr.
takes
Speaker,
precedence,
I move
Mr.
that when the
Speaker.
House adjourns today, it adjourns until 10 a.m. on Friday, April 17th, 2015.
Representative Pepin moves that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 10 a.m. Friday, April 17th, 2015. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The motion prevails.
Division.
I move that the House do now adjourn.
A division having been requested, all those in favor of setting the time of adjournment at 10 a.m. Friday, April 17th, 2015, please rise. You may be seated. All those opposed to the Pepin motion to set the time of adjournment, please rise. The motion prevails. Representative Pepin.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House do now adjourn.
Representative Pepin moves that the House do now adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The motion prevails, and the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. Friday, April 17th, 2015.